Hi, I'm Seth Kahn.
And I'm Mark Levy.
And this is Planet of the Associations. Mark, what is Planet of the Association?
Planet of the Associations is about the association of the future, not the far future, but the near future, X+3. The association 3 years from now. What is it that you have to do to be on top of the game and to help the most people and create the biggest impact for your members and the world in the next 3 years? And so when we were speaking last time, we were talking about perfectionism. You were talking about CEOs that you had worked with, and I talked about that I had done kind of a rejection walk in Portland. I had to go up to people to get rejected. So I had to be very much, hey, what's in that bag? Hey, give me one of your donuts. That sounds like me anyway. I don't understand why I went to Portland for that.
And the idea there was to get comfortable with rejection, to get comfortable with making outrageous requests, and to see that it didn't puncture your personality, that you're still able to cope, that you could go past one more no and get to a yes sooner or later, right? The idea was that you could be comfortable with your behavior and not afraid of being rejected.
Right. And you had, I think, a final thought. I had said something about knocking you off your perfectionistic horse.
Yeah, I was thinking actually about strange interactions on the street and how they sometimes jumble you and you get things that are not quite expected. And I remember when I was doing street theater, I was with a member of my company and we had gone to pick up a pizza. And it was common knowledge with my theater company that I had a degree in mathematics. We used to joke about it. In fact, I worked math into some of the theater things in strange and arcane ways. So it was something that people would give me a hard time about. So we went to pick up the pizza and we were picking it up at DuPont Circle at a pizza place, Vesuvio's, that no longer exists. It was a great pizza place. And so my friend pulled his Volkswagen Bug up to the street and I jumped out of the car, ran in, picked up our pizza. And as I'm walking out the door, this homeless guy comes up to me. Clearly, he's in rags and doesn't smell so great. You could see he's been on the street for a while. And he starts talking to me and he says, "Hey, can I have a slice of your pizza?" And I said, "No, actually you can't. There's about 6 people who, threw their money in a pot to get this pizza. And it's only one pizza. I really need to deliver the whole pizza when I go back." And now I've made it to the car. I'm getting in the car. I close the door and he leans down on the window and kind of puts his hands, on the window frame. And he looks me right in the eye and he says, "I want what you've got, mathematics." And the guy and I, who was my driver, and I kind of looked at each other and went, "Whoa," and drove away. And it was one of those moments, where the universe kind of steps in with something completely out of the blue, and it seemed to strike a chord with us and feel almost mystical in some kind of strange way. So that's what came up for me when I was listening to these random encounters that you were having, asking people for their donuts and so forth. Now, what does that have to do with anything? Well, it's not clear. Unclear, as a friend of mine often says. Nonetheless, we have content for you today.
Right. We do have content for you beyond the pizza. Why is pizza in 8 slices, by the way? Why not 9 slices? Why not 7 slices?
Well, because
you don't have to answer that.
Okay.
Right. We'll get to it.
Okay.
So where I wanted to kick this off with is I was working with a client, and the client wanted to do a survey for the business, like a survey that the public would take. And essentially it was a survey for biz dev. It was in order to get them excited about doing business with the company. That was the idea behind the survey. So it needn't be some statistically valid, like super. You didn't need a mathematician from Washington. Right, exactly. So she said, "Mark, what should my survey questions be?" And I said, "I don't know. I don't write up surveys. Let's look up best practices for surveys, and I'll tell you what your question should be." So we sat there and we looked up best practices for surveys. And one of the very first things that this article I was reading said is you should create survey questions that will help you with the answers that you want. And so what that meant was not ask leading survey questions that manipulate people into giving you answers that bolster your premise. That's not what it meant. what it meant was if you want an idea in a certain like part of the business or part of the world, right? If you want to talk about marketing, ask question about like how often you should market to a group, ask questions about how often should I market to this group, right? So, but what I also realized was because she wanted to use this survey for a biz dev perspective, I interpreted it to mean that you want to ask questions that lead, you want your survey questions to lead to something newsworthy, right? Because that would be the best thing you could do in order to attract people to your survey and to your business. If you had a piece of actual news that there could be a news release about and that reporters would want to write about, if you got a sizable enough group, either quantitative or qualitative feedback, like that would draw attention to your survey or so. So the whole thing became, okay, what would be newsworthy here if we found that out? And we structured the questions around that. And so I had told you that story before, and you loved the idea of that as a frame, this idea of what's newsworthy. What was it that you liked so much, and how would you use it from an association standpoint?
Well, I think that, associations are constantly trying to deliver value to their members, and newsworthy is one of those types of values. When there's something newsworthy in your space, you want to know about it. And if you're trying to manufacture what's newsworthy, it can be really challenging. At a certain point, unless you're a professional writer, you kind of run out of leads and sources and all of that. And we talked last time about jumpstart storytelling and how it surfaces what the audience is interested in. And that comes back to one of my favorite tactics when I'm working in strategic planning with a client, and that has to do with understanding the future from the point of view of the audience, so that we get to see what are their limitations, what opportunities do they see, what challenges do they envision, and all of that comes back to my early experience in knowledge management, where we were looking at how we create wide and deep knowledge. So an association, I would think, would be very interested in creating wide and deep knowledge in the particular domain that they're serving. And so what do I mean by wide knowledge? By wide knowledge, I mean taking what you already know and applying it to adjacent areas. Right. So, for example, if you're really good at proposal writing, if you have the Association of Proposal Writers, and why are they writing proposals? To get business? You could ask the question, are these skills going to be helpful to other kinds of biz dev? Right. That would be an example of going wide. Going deep is taking the knowledge that you already have and finding new application for it. So are there skills in proposal writing that can be directly transferred into something wholly new, not something adjacent? And that's driving your knowledge deep. Both of those are of value to members of an association, to people who are in that space. So those are examples of how do you create stuff that people are going to want to know about, that are newsworthy, essentially. And so I think understanding how to generate newsworthy content is a key skill in today's market.
Yeah. And what you said reminds me the idea of perhaps in creating questions or thinking about what might be newsworthy for your association or for your business in general, it's the idea of what are the given assumptions around a certain idea or a certain practice in your field or in your industry, and then asking people about ways that are different from the assumptions. Right? Like that's really all of differentiation and positioning. I don't know if I've said this before on any of the other episodes, but that's really the master idea behind differentiation or positioning. It's the idea of here's what most people think of when they think of this, and here's how we're different than what it is that they think of. Right? That's a literal exercise that I go through people. Write down what people think of your industry. They don't know you. They don't know your association, let's say. They don't know you personally, but they've dealt with other associations before. So what are all the assumptions? What do they think you're going to tell them about pricing? What do you think they're going to tell them about benefits? What do you think you're going to tell them? Like all the assumptions. And then after they have that down and we look over those, then it's, pardon me, what are all the ways you're different from the assumptions? What ideas, insights, stories, all things that you know that they don't know. right? It's going to be surprising for you. And so you base things on that. And that's kind of at the kernel of being newsworthy, right? This idea.
And part of the power of that is that bridge into that differentiated space. Because what I found is that you can't just jump into something wholly new and different from what someone's doing, because then it seems strange. But if you can build a bridge from where they are to it, and the assumption is the bridge in that case. In fact, the very thing where we say, this is not how I look at it, that creates a link to how you do look at it. And that's critical, because you want your people to go with you. Every good story, every good communique carries your audience into a new world, but you got to get them across that bridge. You got to get them from where they are to where you want to be. And this is why the listening is good. It's not about being reactive. It's not about only serving people what they know they want. Hey, you have a great quote about that. You shared it with me before we got into
Oh, yeah. Yeah. David Cronenberg, the director, the guy who did The Fly and other films. He's very much an art house director. I love some of his work. So Cronenberg years ago said some quote. This won't be a verbatim quote, but it's roughly the quote. He said something like, an entertainer gives you those good old songs that you know and love so well. An artist gives you what you couldn't know you'd want this time, but you know you'd want next time. Right? So that, right? The entertainer gives you what you already know. The artist gives you what you couldn't know you wanted because it doesn't exist yet.
Right.
But you know you'd want it next time because after you'd see it, right? That's the old idea, right? Henry Ford, where he said, if I asked the public what it is they wanted, they'd ask for a faster horse.
Right.
It's like they couldn't know.
Yeah, and I think it was Ken Cragen, who was a great agent in the music business, who talked about the formula for when an accomplished and well-known entertainer gets on stage, that they should have 40% old content and 60% new content. So in other words, we all want to come in here. What was it? Leonard Skinner, Freebird, right? That's the most requested song ever in the history of music. Freebird by Leonard Skinner. I actually don't even know it that well. I'm sure if I heard it, I would recognize it.
Oh, yeah.
But anyways, everybody wants to hear Freebird, right? But they also don't just want to hear Freebird. They want to hear the new stuff too. In fact, they want a little bit more new stuff than old stuff, because they want that constant sense of being pulled into the future, right? Which is what the artist does in that quote.
That's interesting. I would give pushback on that.
Okay.
Only because I know I once saw Paul McCartney in concert and he played a new song. And that's when we all got up to go to the bathroom or something like that. We just wanted to hear Beatles and Wings. We didn't care, like, I don't want to hear your new thing, geez. So I think it depends. I think, remember what we said, my friend Dov Baron said.
What we said, he said?
Value, right. Value is values based.
Yes.
So I think the idea of if you look at if you're there, this is own personal values. If you're there for innovation, you want things to be as new as possible. But if you're not there for innovation, innovation's going to be upsetting to you. But what that quote by Cronenberg would suggest is it's upsetting to you because you haven't seen it yet. But now once you've seen it and you know what it's like, then you'll kind of welcome it then. So this idea, how would associations use this?
This idea of newness versus oldness or similarity. I think that, what association members want when they get together is a combination of both of those things. They want to reestablish relationships. They want to see old friends. They want a reaffirmation that they're still relevant, that they're in the right field, that their work is valued, that they're valued. And that's all about the former, right? Which is about kind of what we already know. It's an experience we've had before. But then they also want to be pulled into the future. They want to make sure that they're still going to be relevant as things are changing around them. For example, as we emerge from the pandemic right now, everybody's talking about what's the new normal? How am I going to make it in the new world? What's changing? What's not changing? People want that information so that they can be part of that world, so that they will have a home in that space. And people get very excited about new things, and when they've got a clear algorithm for how to execute, for how to make it work for them. When somebody presents something and says, okay, so this is coming up on the horizon, and here's a methodology for you to think about, or a framework for you to use, so that you can have a home in that space as it emerges, even though you have no experience in it or little experience in it.
So it's almost like an association needs to think in those two different compartments. Here are the good old songs that people love so well and know so well. And here are the things that they can't know,
right?
That they want now, but they will know that they want next time.
Right. So as let me just share with you a little bit about kind of different stages as we come out of the pandemic. There's 5 stages of crisis response that actually shed some light on this and help businesses to think about where they're going from here. So I'll just quickly enumerate them. The first one is shock and triage, right? When you first, like middle of March last year, when we're all being told we're going to be staying home for 2 weeks, and it's like, oh my God, can I really hold my business that long? We're going to have a 2-week interruption. And then over the next few weeks, as it kind of keeps unfolding and we realize it's deeper and deeper and deeper, there's both this sense of shock, meaning I'm having a hard time digesting this, right? There's such a radical shakeup in my system that I'm actually kind of, all the blood's going to my central organs so that I stay alive while I'm trying to figure out what's going on around me. And triage, which is making sure that those things that are most fundamental are maintained even during this hard shock. The second step, though, is adaptation. And this is still, we're talking early on. And that's where new forms of value emerge in response to the need. So people need help getting through this hard time. And so many associations rose to the occasion and delivered what their members needed and really cemented a lot of loyalty, as well as even built and by creating increased market penetration by providing guidance on how their members should act in the initial stage of the pandemic. The time frame, by the way, for adaptation is now. It's now. What do I need now? It's like there's a flood. I'm on the roof with my dog. I need a helicopter now. That's how I'm adapting to this urgent situation, right? Third is stabilization. Now you've got enough distance from the initial shock and triage that you're starting to ask the question, how can I continue to operate in this new environment, even if it's not the ideal environment? So I'm not, masks aren't off, doors aren't open, but I need to stabilize. I need to make sure I survive this. And so you're identifying these paths to sustainability, and the time frame shifts a little bit farther out to near term, just beyond now. The fourth stage is reinvention. And that's where you have a vetting of the old traditional stuff, as well as looking at new opportunities. You're innovating. So and maybe this even relates a little bit to our formula there about how much old stuff and how much new stuff. The old stuff, you're asking the question, what can I get rid of? Because I know I'm going to need some new stuff. So what's essential, what's not? And the time frame then becomes near to medium term, 3, 6 months, a year, and so on. So your time frame is starting to expand now as the shock recedes into the past. And then the last stage is strategic map making. And that's where you're reviewing and updating your mission, your strategy, your market, who you are, what you do. And the time frame now goes from medium to long term. Now you have enough stability that you can start to build a map that's going to take you to where you want to go. So as we look at kind of all 5 of those areas and ask ourselves, where are we now as we go through the pandemic? We're kind of moving out of the third of stabilization. Many organizations have survived for a year, and we're moving into reinvention, and many organizations even into strategic map making.
So how do you go about reinventing? You're saying that's the stage that we're moving into.
Yeah, reinventing is, there's all those great stories about what business am I really in? Like there was I forget the details, but there was a story about a cardboard manufacturer who realized that they were in the, the wrapping business or something, and they got into molded plastics, right? But if they had hung with cardboard, they would have gone out of business
Right.
So the question is, in this new world, what business are you really in? So if before the pandemic, you were providing, services and products to people who, let's say, were plumbers, I'm just going to pick something from random. What's changed now that the pandemic is over? So you need to provide safety standards that you didn't have to provide before. You have to provide new protocols for how to enter people's homes, how to do your work. Well, understanding what's safe and what's not safe in terms of what's going through the pipes and how it spreads into the homes or the commercial buildings where you're working. It's like what stays the same and what changes. And those organizations that really have an opportunity for a game changer are like the cardboard manufacturer. They might go to a completely different level of context. They might see that what they have been doing was very specialized and it fit before, but now that things have been shaken up, they really need to move to another level. So it's time for boards of directors, senior leadership teams, key players to be meeting and having fundamental conversations and either reaffirming where you are or making a big change.
Well, what you're saying also reminds me, you're talking about it from a reinvention standpoint, but of course, as a differentiator and a marketer and a positioning guy, I think of that kind of category too, as it's also a marketing concept, this idea of what business are you really in. I think Theodore Levitt in 1960 wrote an article, still widely read for the Harvard Business Review, called, Marketing Myopia, I think is what
right. That's it's like one of the most requested.
Yeah. And so in it, it's this idea of so many ideas come from that one article. But in particular, one thing he talked about was that the trains are being overtaken because they thought of themselves as being in the train industry as opposed to the transportation industry. So they lost all kinds of, like contracts and types of business that they could have gotten because they didn't think beyond the train on the tracks. And that kind of idea, as far as what business are you really in, and perhaps there's a new category to be made and so forth. I've read about things where I forget, it was from an excellent marketing book I read once, but it was, I can't remember the title, but the idea of like an undertaker might be in the celebration of life business. They could look. So how would that change what their business is about? Instead of being an undertaker, they're in the celebration of life business. Richard Branson, very famously, when Virgin Airlines started, he said, we're in the entertainment business. Because of course we're in the airplane business and the planes need to be on time and all those kinds of things. But otherwise, a lot of, the planes are very, very similar. So we need to be entertaining. And by the way, Branson took it so far that he was voted down for this, but he originally wanted to make the first class, I think, called upper class. And he wanted to make coach called like steerage or something like that. And they voted him down.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, so what it is you're talking about, I think you're talking about very much, you're talking about really changing things in a very deep way, whereas I'm talking about changing things from a marketing way or a frame way, but nevertheless, the frame can lead to the big changes, to the big, deep changes.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about undertakers right there. I mean, that's a great example. I mean, if you're in the business of disposing of a dead body, like who wants to deal with you? Nobody, right? That's like something you hope you never have to deal with. And of course, we all will have to deal with it.
Right.
Whereas if you're in the celebrating life business, all of a sudden there's like light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, it's like, pun intended, but it's like, now you've got something to get excited about, something to acknowledge, something to honor. You completely flip the energy, and that will drive deep change in terms of how you conduct not just your marketing, but how you conduct your business. And where you might find, I mean, like you can look at Richard Branson, right? Like you can kind of imagine what the essence of his idea was between upper class and steerage. And you can see that those people who are going into the upper class are going to have entertainment experiences that they're going to talk about probably for their whole life, right? Because that's only, you'd have to create that. I remember the first time I flew on Virgin Airlines, and you walk in and it's all pink, right? It's like, it doesn't look like any other plane you've been in your life. And I remember the first time I watched the instructions, how they always tell you got to buckle your seatbelts, and if we crash in the ocean, the plane will turn into, your life. What is it? Your seat will turn into a life preserver, blah, blah, blah. We've all heard that so many times that we just tune it out when it happens. And he had this whole song and dance number, literally like a Broadway production with magicians and dancers and, amazing things that you're glued to your screen. You're going, oh my God. And you hear people laughing as it goes through the process. So there's the entertainment aspect of it. And then you've got an experience that is irreplicable. Is that what the word?
I don't think so.
Irrefutable? No, it's not a word. Okay. Well, you've got an inimitable experience.
Leave a blank, and the listener will fill it in.
Anyways, it's, you're going to talk about, nobody talks about Delta or United Airlines in those kinds of terms. Nobody says, you got to go take a flight on Delta. Nobody says that.
Well, but see, by the way, what it is you're saying, I was thinking, first, I haven't been on a plane for a year because of the time that we're doing this.
Right.
But I used to be on planes many times a month. And I remember seeing the safety videos for like United or whatever, and they put humor into it, or American, or maybe both. I fly predominantly United and American, and they would be, like a llama in it. They would do stuff, and it was cute. But I remember thinking, oh, this is copycat stuff. Like, it's because at this point it's considered safe.
Right.
Do that.
Right.
When Southwest or Virgin, or like when those guys were doing it, it was risky.
That's right.
And they pioneered it. It's like, oh, okay, now it's safe. People like it or expect, and I tell people the hardest part of coming up with a differentiation strategy for your association or your company, that's the easiest thing for me to do in the world. The hard thing is for you to live it. Because in order to be different, you actually have to be different. You can't just say you're different. You actually have to do things differently, and sometimes multiple things differently. And sometimes you need to lead the way in doing things. And most businesses and most people won't do that. Like, they may pay lip service to it, but they want to be different in a super safe way. It's like, oh, I'm fine being different. But in their minds, they have like the whole house has been childproofed ahead of time in their minds. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll be different. Like, so they'll knock into things and they won't get hurt. It's like, no, you need to, go new routes, and people look at you.
That reminds me with the Grand Challenge work I do. You're asking an organization to take on a big, bold goal that is addressing a socially intractable problem. There's a lot of risk in that. And what you see in the private sector, especially with the really large organizations, is people giving lip service to corporate social responsibility. So they'll say, okay, we're gonna give every employee $100 to give to their favorite charity, or we're gonna work with the local food bank or whatever. And it really has nothing to do with the major part of their business. It's not part of the culture. It's bolted on. And there's this thinking that, it'll be easy to axe once they don't need it anymore. And it just goes to show that they're really not invested at all. Versus an organization that says, we're going to make a pledge to make this what we're about, right? And we're going to get known for this. We're going to be invested in this. It's going to become part of our lives. It's going to become part of our culture. And that's where you see the real successes. So, for example, at the Center for Financial Planning, the CFP Board Center for Financial Planning, where they're opening up the finance profession to people of color and women, that is something that they're 100% committed to. That is the future. Or the American Nurses Association, measurably improving the life of America's nurses and therefore the nation. There's no way around that. That is part of what they need to do in order to continue to deliver the value that they're designed to deliver. So having that full level commitment is where the energy is, not in the kind of additional bolt-on, which is like having someone live their differentiation versus, give it lip service and not do a great job of it.
Oh yeah, you have to, be that thing fully. Had I ever talked about this? a friend of mine who's a magician, Rich Murata, he once, years ago, he once talked about on Saturday Night Live, the late Chris Farley, right? Everyone knows Chris Farley, right? Heavyset guy and brilliantly funny. And Rich Murata called it giving a scene Farley commitment. Because if you go back and watch the scenes he's in, he's 100% in the character who he is. That's why you see him falling over tables and breaking tables, and he's screaming and he's sweating. He doesn't break character. He's 100. So it's this idea. I always think of it that way. Even with brands, I talk to them.
Right.
Like, you need to give it Farley commitment. Like you need to, that's who you are. That's who you are. You can't go in and out of authenticity.
And we'll be giving our next episode Farley level commitment. And I hope you'll join us
on Planet of the Associations.